Charities are warning that lockdown could lead to an increase in cervical cancer cases as a result of 1 million women having their smear test cancelled or postponed.
And it's a worry that resonates with our next guest, Penny Simmonds, a cervical cancer survivor who now campaigns to raise awareness of the importance of screening.
She's joining us now alongside Dr Philippa Kaye. Morning to both of you. Thank you very much
Morning.
indeed for joining us. 1 million women missing their smear test. And this looks like, and I think you've almost hinted at this, Philippa, there is something of a postcode lottery going on here.
Yes, because it really depends where you live. So if you are in Northern Ireland, Wales or Scotland, the national screening programme in those countries has been temporarily suspended. And if you're in England, it really depends on the capacity of your GP surgery at the moment. So it really does depend where you live, whether or not you'll be able to have your appointment.
And 3 months difference, Philippa, can make a big difference, really. What about those at high risk here?
So if you are considered at high risk because you have a symptom that could be related to cervical cancer, bleeding after sex, for example, bleeding between your periods, then your GP will still refer you in for investigation and treatment. But if you are having cervical screening, the advantage here is that cervical screening picks up pre-cancerous changes, cells which have the potential to change into cancer but aren't cancer yet, and those changes happen really slowly. So although I hugely, of course, always encourage women to have their screening, I don't want people to be terrified that the last 3 months will have really made a huge difference. As soon as you can get your screening appointment, definitely do so.
And Penny, the proof of how important a smear test is, it lies with the core of your story, because the smear test saved your life.
Yeah, quite literally. Having a smear test totally saved my life. And the NHS screening programme probably saved my life, because I had absolutely no symptoms whatsoever to indicate that there was anything wrong with me when I found out that I had cervical cancer.
So you had your first smear test in 2016, and it showed that you had borderline abnormalities, and it wasn't until the following year that you returned for your second smear test that everything changed. So just explain what happened.
So I had a routine smear in November 16, just completely routine. And following that routine smear, I got the results back that I had borderline abnormalities and high-risk HPV. So because I had these borderline abnormalities, I had an exam called a colposcopy just to check that everything was okay. And I went for that exam and everything was fine. But because of having had the borderline abnormalities, I was told that I needed to have a smear the following year, and actually yearly smears, and done in a hospital until the smears came back normal. So after the exam, I didn't think anything of it in November 16, and then kind of the year later got a reminder saying, can you come in for your next smear because of last year's smear? And I literally didn't think anything of it, went for it in the hospital, and then a few weeks later got a letter essentially telling me that there was some severe abnormalities, and they diagnosed the cancer from that.
What went on from there? What happened next?
Well, I got my letter back literally just before the whole world was shutting down for Christmas. And the letter said that I had something called severe dyskaryosis. So it didn't actually tell me I had cancer, but it said that I had something that was obviously wrong with me. And from there, I totally panicked, as you'd probably expect. And I had another colposcopy, which showed that there were abnormalities. From there, I had a biopsy. The biopsy showed that found the cancer. And from the biopsy a few weeks later, I had a hysterectomy. And I was lucky. I was really lucky, and it's a funny thing to say when you're talking about having cancer, but I was really lucky, because ultimately the cancer was found early, and I just needed a hysterectomy, and I didn't need to have chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And I was also lucky because I'd had my children. So although it was a massive operation, it didn't resonate in the same way as it would have done for other women.
And so, Penny, for you, what it did make you realise was how many of your friends hadn't been going for their smear test. And I guess that kind of highlights how many women across the country aren't going for their regular smear tests.
Absolutely. I had always been led to believe that I was low risk. So I did go for my smear test, but it was low down on the priority list. It was just an irritant, something that I had to get done in my very long to-do list, and I would go. But when I found out that I had cervical cancer, and I was telling some of my friends, and they're probably watching now and smiling sheepishly because they know who they are, some of them turned around and said, oh my goodness, I haven't had a smear for 10 years. Like, they hadn't had a smear since before they'd had kids. And, you know, my response to them, and one of the reasons I wrote my blog was because, you know, who knows what would have happened if that had been me. And if that had been me and I'd waited 10 years to have a smear test, then I might not be here to tell my tale, because I didn't have any symptoms whatsoever.
And Philippa, a lot of charities are concerned that our new way of life, our social distancing, means that women will be very anxious to go to their doctor. This is an intimate examination. There's no avoiding that. What do you say to them?
So Cancer said that the number of people presenting with symptoms relating to all cancers has dropped by 75% during lockdown. Now, that doesn't mean that these cancers aren't happening. Of course they are. Cancer doesn't know about coronavirus. What it means is that people are going to be presenting later and later, and early diagnosis can be the difference between life and death. As simple as that. So if you have any symptoms, then definitely go to your doctor. When you do go for your screening, be that in England now, if that's possible, or when they reopen the screening programme in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, it might look slightly different in that your nurse might be wearing PPE. We might say, unfortunately, you can't have somebody else with you in the room, but the test itself will feel the same as it did before. The examination with the speculum is exactly the same as it was before. And I really encourage women. We know that 72% of women in England only attend their screening. But the combination of HPV vaccination and cervical screening has the potential to eradicate cervical cancer in the UK entirely. And for the 3,000 women a year who are diagnosed with cervical cancer and the 750 a year who die of the condition, that would be life-saving.
And so I think it's really important to say here, if you do have any symptoms, like you say, to call your GP. What are the symptoms we're looking for?
So bleeding after sex, bleeding in between your periods, an abnormal offensive smelling discharge for you, or abdominal tummy or pelvic pain. Now, those don't mean that you have cervical cancer. Those are symptoms that could be related to it and need to be investigated.
You also say that there are 5 things that women can do whilst the service is paused.
So there are very you can do to look after yourself. The first is that if you have a child who is going to be due the HPV vaccination when they go to school, be that in September, then absolutely go ahead and they can have that. And that's for boys and girls, because for boys it protects against penile cancer and it can protect against oral cancer as well. But the most important thing that you could do for yourself is actually to stop smoking, because cigarette smoking affects your immune system and it affects your ability to deal with HPV. HPV is really common. 80% of us will be infected by it at some point in our lives, and often they cause warts and verrucas, and it doesn't mean you're going to have the high-risk HPV that is associated with cervical cancer. But if you stop smoking, if you did get a high-risk HPV, your immune system would be better able to deal with it. So those 2 things are really the most important things that you could do.
Penny,
apart from getting your screening, of course.
Say that again?
Apart from getting your screening, of course.
Of course. Important to finish on that. Penny, Dr Philippa, thank you very much
both.
indeed. The NHS say, a spokesperson, has said where local screening providers have decided to reschedule appointments due to coronavirus, we are working with them to ensure plans are in place to resume appointments as soon as possible. Cervical cancer takes a long time to develop, so the risk of any clinical harm is very low. Patients are strongly encouraged to seek help from their GP if they have any symptoms.